Tying a fly today that I've wanted to get to for a long time. This is called a Ball Peen Craw. There's a gentleman by the name of Jay Zimmerman who's written two really good books on bass flies as well as carp fly. And he wrote in his book commenting on the hammerhead fly that I came up with a number of years ago, how it inspired him to come up with this fly, because where he fishes, the carp are a little bit spookier, and he needed something that wasn't quite the depth charge that the hammerhead can be, and would present a little bit better to the fish. So he came up with the Ball Peen Craw. And what I find most fascinating about this is how I developed the hammerhead years ago, just kind of on a whim, and it turned out to work pretty good. There are bits and parts of that fly from other flies that I was tying and teaching at the time. So it wasn't any revelation that I had when I came up with the hammerhead, but somehow that got in his mind and inspired him to come up with this fly. That's what I find utterly fascinating about fly tying, is you can tie something that works for you in a certain situation, or is in a lot of different situations. Somebody else can take it and do something with it and adapt it to their circumstances, and it inspired to them to come up with something totally new as well. So we're gonna have some fun. This is the Ball Peen Craw, and I'll get started tying. Start the Ball Peen Craw with my hook and the vise. This is a Mustad 33.99 in a size 4. It is a heavy sprout wet fly hook, but per his design, Mr. Zimmerman wanted a shorter shanked hook. And this is a number 4. He ties with a number 6. I don't know if he goes any smaller, but part of the reason for that is the carp that he originally tied this for are in skinnier water where he's at. Now, there's a big difference between fishing for carp up on the Great Lakes, where it's usually a bit deeper. If you can get out early in the morning, they're on the hunt a little bit more. They're not as spooky. Whereas if you're even in the Midwest here where I'm at, if I'm fishing out in a river here or a pond, they're much more spooky. So the regular hammerhead just doesn't really work that well unless you're basically wanting to dredge through runs or something like this and happen to catch a carp. So if you're targeting them, a little bit smaller works a little bit better. But he has also found that this fly works great for smallmouth. So I'm going with a little bit heavier hook and eyes just to see how it does with the smallmouth. Now, I've debarbed the hook. I'm going to attach my thread. I'm using a 70 Denier UTC and a rusty brown. Got some wax on my thread here. Attach my thread a little bit behind the eye of the hook. There is a specific way that Mr. Zimmerman likes to tie this fly, and there are reasons for it, which I will explain as we go along here. So with my thread almost right up against the eye here, I'm going to tie in the crystal flash first. He's using a rusty brown crystal flash, I think it was. The only one that I have that comes close is a copper, which I think works well enough. And mine is a flash accent, by the way, it's a Flashabou accent. Crystal flash and Flashabou accent are essentially the same thing made by a different company. Now, they are a little bit different. There are subtle differences, but in terms of tying them for flies like this, I don't think there's much of a difference. I'm going to take 4 strands here from one side of that. I want to make certain that they're all even. And I'm going to attach that right in the middle. Start wrapping down the hook shank, maybe about the width of the eye of the hook. Then reach up and fold the rest of those back on top. I'm going to keep going down the hook shank till I get down to the end of the body. The important thing is you want to make certain that when the Flashabou is tied in and doubled over like this, that all of it is more than 2 inches. The overall length of the fly needs to be 2 inches. So I'm going to leave that all long for now. I'll bring my thread back up. Don't have to have touching turns here. I'm going to bring it right up to behind the eye of the hook. Put some wax on my thread. I'm going to tie in the Sili Legs. I'm using just some pumpkin colored black flecked Sili Legs. There's different types that you can use out on the market. It's up to you. I have found these work real good for the original Hammerhead and a lot of different smallmouth and carp flies. Same thing, I'm actually leaving the little tab on the end just to help control them a little bit more while I'm tying them in. But I'm going to tie these in so that they are right about the midpoint behind the eye of the hook. Wrapping that down, I'm going to wrap backwards just a little bit. And then I'm going to fold this back over and keep wrapping down the hook shank. Have to be careful here. There's one thing you want to make certain of when you get back to the back here. Right about here, which is almost the very end of the body here, I'm going to loosen up my wraps. And what I want to do is I want to have more collecting wraps. I'm not binding this in, I'm just collecting this together. I'm lightly wrapping in my thread. What that's going to do is it's going to collect all of this down to the hook shank. It's not going to tighten it down to where it flares out. If it flares out, it's going to change the behavior of the fly and how it swims in the water. And what Mr. Zimmerman has found is that it will not track as well in the water. You don't get it running hook point up. That's the whole point of this. Keeping in mind, we're going to put our Bead-Chain on here, but Bead-Chain on here is not heavy enough to flip this hook over. It's just, it can get there, but you got to do a little work. Let's put it that way. Just to tie it on by itself, it's not enough. That's why the Hammerhead has some weight behind it, so that it helps to flip it over and helps it to sink faster. Without that, it's much easier for this, especially with the Sili Legs back here that tend to float. It's much easier for this to ride hook point down. So you don't want those flared. The other thing is you'll notice I have tightened down right behind the eye of the hook here, my thread, and I actually have a little bump of Sili Leg sticking out here. This is what he calls a little saddle right here. And that's important because that's where we're going to tie our Bead-Chain in. It's a black Bead-Chain for this hook. I'm using a large size. His recipe calls for a medium. I'm going to tie that in right in that little saddle there. And again, this is important because if you tie that Bead-Chain right down to the hook shank, it isn't quite enough to get it to flip over. By elevating the Bead-Chain off of the hook shank just a little bit, it helps it to offset that center of gravity a little bit more in favor of the Bead-Chain. Sometimes when dealing with these flies that you want light enough that they don't spook the fish and bulky enough to present well, you have to not only fudge with the materials that you're using, but even the techniques of how you tie them in, because sometimes it won't do it otherwise. You got to find those little ways of getting it to work the way you want. Right here, you could put some head cement if you want. I'm going to put a little drop of super glue. You could use Zap-A-Gap, something like that. And the primary reason for that is I think the super glue is going to hold this all together better than my head cement. Another thing that is important, and I found this to be also true with the Hammerhead, is that you want to really anchor that Bead-Chain down real well in its position. If it is allowed to rotate around the hook shank, it changes the dynamic of the fly. So now with my Bead-Chain secure and setting up, I'm going to wrap back. Again, I'm not totally 100% back here to the back because of the fact that I don't want to squeeze that down. I'm going to put my first bit of dubbing in a dubbing loop, and my first wrap will just go around that to cover it, but not crank it down to the hook shank or anything. I want to make certain that those stay perpendicular to the hook shank. Okay. Real quick, before I go any further, I'm going to trim this tail and everything. I want to make certain that it is 2 inches. Per his recipe, it's all got to be 2 inches long. Now, it's always a good idea, one, if you have a ruler around with you on your tying desk to measure things, but also it's a good idea to just get an idea with different flies where along your vise here roughly is a certain marker. So I've got a little piece of silver steel in here, pin for the jaws here. Knowing what that is that 1.5 inches, or this valley right here, is that 2 inches or whatnot, sometimes helps. You don't have to measure everything every time. For me, I've got 2 inches is pretty much right down in this little valley right here. So a little bit in front of it. So I'm going to collect all of this together. And I'm going to trim this right at that 2 inches. Now I'm going to put in my first bit of dubbing. The first third of the hook shank is covered in a Dave Whitlock's SLF. This is a crayfish brown. Generally, it's a near enough crayfish brown color. I'm going to make about a 2 to 3 inch dubbing loop here. Advance my thread forward to get it up out of the way. I'm going to put some wax on the thread. A lot of people like to use a real tacky wax. It's up to you, whatever you like. The wax is simply, as I put the dubbing material in here, it have a tendency to slide out. I'm going to put my dubbing loop tool in the thread. And then I'm going to take some of my dubbing here, and I'm going to start pulling out pieces of this and sliding it on up into the dubbing loop. You want to put a good bit in here. This is a shorter fibered material, the Whitlock's SLF. So you want to make it kind of dense. We're going to brush this out to get some more of it out, but mostly it's going to be the rusty brown craw dub that is going to make it look nice and bushy and shaggy. Feel free to put a good bit in there. If you have to, we'll cut it off if it's not used. Getting all of that in here, I'll then hang my dubbing loop over my finger, spin my dubbing loop tool to get all of that spun up. Now I'm going to use a brush. You can use different dubbing brushes. This stage with this, I like to just use a toothbrush. What it does is it just kind of gets some of those fibers sticking out a little bit more and makes it a little bit bushier. You can collect the unused dubbing out of your toothbrush and put it with the others to use again. Now, as I said, I'm going to wrap this around. Going backwards, my first wrap, not going to be super tight. I just want to cover up the thread and collect all those legs down. I don't want them flared out. Now, all my wraps are going in front of the other one. I'm going to brush the dubbing from the previous wrap rearward so I'm not trapping it along the hook shank. And I'm only going to go up about a third of the way along the hook shank. So that is about it. I think I get one more wrap in here. Usually it's right about on this hook, right about the point of the hook. So I'll wrap my thread down. Now I can trap that dubbing loop in. And I can trim away the excess. With that anchored down, I'm now going to use another brush. In this case, it's a wire brush that I'm going to use to brush that out. And this is going to really kind of pull those fibers out from underneath and get those looking a little bit shaggier. But as you can see, the material itself is not that long, and that's fine. So now a little bit longer dubbing loop. Come right on up. This time I'm going to go right in front. Put a little bit more wax on my thread. Set my dubbing loop tool in there. I'm putting my scissors in that dubbing loop tool as well so that it keeps it from twisting up while it's resting there, so that it keeps that loop separated. The next material that fills the other 2/3 is some rusty craw dub. Take my scissors out, and I have my finger inside that loop. I'm going to take some of this rusty craw dub and put it up in here. I want to try and have the fibers going out left to right a little bit more. This is a longer fibered material, but don't make the mistake of making this too sparse in here. We want to put a good bit of dubbing in there so that we are really covering up that hook shank, and we will brush it out to get the shaggy appearance that we want. Notice how that wax right here just helps it from sliding out. And that's the whole point of it. I don't like a tacky wax when doing this, primarily because the tacky wax gets all on my fingers, and to me, it gets inside the dubbing itself when you're wrapping it on. Now, I may be doing it wrong. Wouldn't be the first time that I was not doing something the way it was supposed to be done. But this works for me. So once I have that dubbing loop ready, I'll spin my dubbing loop tool, let that go on up and spin into that thread. And again, I'm taking my toothbrush to kind of brush out any loose fibers, get some of that looser. And then I will start to apply the dubbing loop. Again, making certain that you're stroking this back so that these long fibers will get brushed out and they will give us our nice shaggy body and profile, as opposed to being trapped down under the dubbing loops and not really being of much use. I'm making certain these wraps are going in tight in front of each one of them. I just want to get that nice and dense along the hook shank. We'll brush that out in just a second. Get a couple of nice tight wraps up against those Bead-Chain eyes. And then this very last wrap is going to come right over the Bead-Chain and right down in front. Wrap my thread around that dubbing loop and right behind the eye of the hook to secure it in. I'll turn that over, trim away the rest of that dubbing loop, and then I'll go ahead and get in a few wraps and a whip finish. Next, a little head cement on there to bind in those thread wraps. And we go back to our wire brush. If you don't have a wire brush like this, all you've got is, like, say, a Velcro dubbing loop tool or dubbing tool. By all means, just use that. Just work it a while. The other thing is if you want to, you can actually use your bodkin. just get your bodkin in here and just pull on this. And what you're going to do is you're going to get those fibers pulled out and or even some of them broken, but they're going to be out, not tight against the body, but out in a nice bushy profile. So even if you don't have a wire brush or something, you can just use your bodkin. Just take your time with it. The more you pick at it, the more you're going to get out. You'll be surprised after a couple minutes at how much you can, of that dubbing that we had in there, you can get out and how much broader this body looks. So the last thing you're going to do is on the bottom side here, you want to kind of pull some of these fibers left and right. You're going to trim along the bottom here, nice and tight. This is also going to help this to want to ride hook point up. And then if you want to, you can trim, if you got some real long fibers here, you can trim those back just a little bit. You're just looking for a bushy profile from side to side here, something that as this is in the water, it's going to look like a big old crayfish, possibly a small little sculpin or something like that. It's just going to have that nice, broad, kind of juicy, come eat me look to it. So that is a Ball Peen Craw. Now I'm going to put a little bit more head cement on this. I have been wanting to tie this for a number of years and get out and fish it in my local waters for smallmouth. And eventually, probably even throw it to some carp around here where they're kind of spooky. It might just be the ticket. A nice juicy kind of meal. I've caught carp, 5 to 8 pound carp on pheasant tail nymphs here under an indicator because they were so spooky. So this might be something to not spook them and cast to them and do a little sight fishing and have some fun. So there is the Ball Peen Craw by Jay Zimmerman. Look for next week. I'm doing another Jay Zimmerman fly called the Jesus Lizard, which is a wonderful little smallmouth and largemouth fly. Thanks for watching today. Thank you for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned a new pattern, at least a tip or trick here and there. If you'd like to help Dress Irons, you can like, comment, share, subscribe, all those wonderful things for the video. You can also head out to dressedirons.com where you can buy flies, tools, stickers, and merch, or you can join a growing community over on Locals at the Dressed Irons Fly Tying Guild. You can also donate to Dressed Irons if you want through the link at the bottom of the description. I thank everybody for their ongoing support, as it really does help the creation of these videos. But what's important is to remember, only fly tying. If you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.